Good. Welcome to class number 82. I hope I got the right number, right? Of Faith and Count. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about another aspect of faith. We learn a lot of things about faith in this class. We have to learn a lot of things about faith in this class. We have to internalize a lot of things about faith in this class. And this is going to be applied to how to deal with things that really shock you and disturb you and knock you off your rocker. So that's tonight's class. It's I guess you could subtitle the class the OMG class. Like, oh my God, OMG. Because there's a very OMG event that happens in this week's Parsha. We have the very first wedding, and really the first well-described marriage of in the Bible, in the Torah, and it's also where we all come from, our family history, our family story. And our family story in the first wedding, Hi Mali, is a very unusual story. I talked about it last year, but this year I'm going to try and deal with another part of the story. So as we know, Yaakov left his father, left Beersheba, and went to Haran to find his wife. And he saw Rachel, and he fell in love with her right away at the well. And he told Lavan, I would work for her for 7 years. And he did. And after 7 years, Lavan had a wedding party. I don't know if you ever heard the story, but they were all singing a song. He invited everybody from the whole town to come. And they were all singing, ole, ole, ole. They were trying to hint to him, your future father-in-law is a swindler. And he's going to trick you, and he's going to give you the wrong girl. But he didn't pick up on it. So as they were singing ole, ole, didn't help any. And that night he went and he took his new wife back to his tent, to his where he lived. And in the morning he woke up, and behold, it was Leah. Oh my God. Another OMG moment. OMG. That's the night's class. And, actually, it's an interesting, my wife heard this from her teacher, Mrs. Cohen, from her seminary, who we found this quote was from the Shema Shmuel. That morning when Yaakov woke up and saw it was Leah, he said, why did you cheat me? Why did you deceive me? And she said back to him, this is the Medrash, it says, she said back to him, well, I learned from you. You deceived your father and tricked your brother out of his birthright. So, why are you pointing fingers at me? Look at yourself. Which immediately raises the question. This is the way to kick off a marriage, and especially the marriage of two very holy people. This is the way they talk to each other the first day. It's a very strange conversation. So she actually explains, and she says that what Leah was actually saying was, the story here is what did you do? Yes, you realized that your brother was not the appropriate person to continue the Jewish people, which you were correct. And therefore you saw he was supposed to give the birthright over to you, which is correct. So you went and you did the right thing. You made a deal with him and you took the birthright. But part of that deal was that I was supposed to be his wife, because they were saying that the older girl of Lavan should go to the older son of Yitzchak, and the younger to the younger, the Rachel to Yaakov. Therefore, I felt into his portion, and when you acquired his portion, you acquired me too. So really, it's correct that I belong to you. And then the story in the Chumash continues, and it says, and this is what I'm going to really dive into tonight. It says that after 7 days, Lavan said, okay, fine, you can have Rachel. I'm not holding her back, but you just have to work for me for another 7 years. And after 7 days of the wedding, Sheva Brachas, which is where we learn the whole idea of Sheva Brachas, the 7 days after you get married, you should be feasting and so and partying and having the Sheva Brachas. then you can have Rachel. And that for 7 days, it says that Yaakov took Rachel, and Yaakov and Vagam. How does the pasuk go? It's very interesting. It says that, yeah. V'yavagam et Rachel, v'yahav gam et Rachel, Mileya, v'Yaakov v'yavad o imo sheva shanim achirot. That Yaakov also loved Rachel more than Leah, literally more than Leah, and he worked for her for 7 more years. Now, okay, remember this line, because this line is going to be very important. And then it says that God saw that Leah was hated, and therefore he opened up her womb, and she had a boy, and she called him Reuven, because he said, now God saw that I was being afflicted, and therefore he heard me. He saw me, and he gave me this child. And then he said she had another child called Shimon. She says, Shimon from Shema, God heard me, and he saw that I was hated, and therefore he gave me another child, and we called him Shimon. And then she went on. She had Levi, and she had Yehuda, and many other children. And what I want to zoom in and understand is this idea of, how could Yaakov hate Leah? This was his first wife. And you're not allowed to continue to be married to somebody if you hate them. The Gemara is very explicit about this. It says, really that it's problematic for the children and everything else. And so if there isn't this kind, if you can't, work on yourself and you can't come to love them, then you shouldn't be married. And so it doesn't seem right, just somebody who follows halacha. And certainly it's very strong language and a very harsh thing to say that he hated Leah. And it was so apparent that God knew about it too. So this is not a new question. It's been dealt with, and we're going to look at 4 different ways. Four different ways, four different explanations of how of this, and each one has its own unique way of understanding a little bit more about the psychology, who we are, because everything we learn in the Torah, especially in Bereshit, is all about, not just about incidents that happened in history. It's about us and our psychological nature, and about the nature of who we are, and about our character traits, and about where we come from, and understanding ourselves. So it's not just merely stories about the past, because this is where we come. This is the seed we come from. This is where we come out from. That's why it's such an interesting. These stories are interesting. It's very relevant, very meaningful. You just have to have the tools to be able to pull it apart. So the first rabbi we'll visit is Rabbi David Kimbri. He was a Sephardi rabbi born in Spain in the 12th century, 1296, I think, or something like that. And he passed away in the 1300s in Provence, France. So he was a Sephardi, but he moved to the Ashkenazi country because it was impossible to live in Spain. It was the Inquisition going on, and it was just terrible. So anyway, so he moved to Spain, and his commentary is a classic commentary on the Chumash, and he says, we don't really understand the word snah, hatred in Hebrew properly. We have a different idea of it, and it's not really especially when it's made in compared to love, it should be understood differently. And he says the key is that first line that I said, keep in line. It says, v'yahav gam et Rachel, and Yaakov loved also Rachel. Now, when you say also, you probably are saying, I like the first one, but I also like the second one. In other words, he loved Leah, but he also loved Rachel. Not that he hated Rachel. He didn't. He loved Rachel. He loved Leah, but he also loved Rachel. But then it says something really strange, which doesn't work in Hebrew, and it certainly doesn't work in English either, which is says Leah, more than Leah. What do you mean more than Leah? You should say, he also loved Rachel and Leah. What do you mean more than Leah? So he says that the grammatical problem here is actually telling you, is written this way to call your attention to the fact of what was going on. He says, yeah, he loved Rachel. He also loved Rachel, but he loved her more than Leah. In other words, he was naturally drawn to Rachel, but he also loved Leah. He did not love her, but he didn't love her as much as Leah. And therefore, that explains why it says later that God saw that she was not loved. She was hated. Not that she was hated, but that she wasn't loved as much. And that's very important psychologically. You see, you learn that like when you're a parent and so forth. If you start showing more attention to one child than the other, even though you love both of them, somebody's going to take it and somebody's going to feel left out. Someone's going to feel hated. They'll notice that that you're not daddy's girl, you're not special, and you're not as much loved. And because you're not just loved, they feel that you actually are hated, even though there are plenty of signs that you are loved. And this is important in all sorts of relationships, mother-in-law, husband, any other situation, any family situation. He's really teaching you a very important lesson about how we were operated and so forth. That, that having more affection for one than the other will definitely make one person feel left out. And the more intense and the more close the relationship is, the more that is. Obviously, at work, you don't get that upset, but when it's dealing with family and family issues and so forth, it's very, very powerful and very strong. Therefore, that's the first lesson about the first rabbi that we look at in this whole story. He says he did not like Leah. He didn't hate her. It was just that his intention, his love was not natural because it was sort of like, a surprise marriage to him. He was really wanting Rachel all the time. That's why he worked for 7 years for her. That's David Kimbri, and it's an interesting lesson. The second lesson, the second rabbi that we're going to look at comes much later in history. His name is the Orach Chaim. I think his name is Rabbi David Attar, I believe so. He was a Sephardi rabbi, lived in Morocco. He's a Moroccan rabbi. His commentary on the Chumash is printed in all the big Chumashim, the Mikros Gedolos, always on the side there. He's a classic commentator. He lived in the late 1600s, early 1700s. So he was born, I think, 1697, if I remember right. And he passed away actually in Israel. He had to leave, also had to leave his country. No, that was the Ramban. But I think maybe he did move to Israel. I don't remember. Anyway, so he has another interesting explanation about this. And he says that actually what was going on, and by the way, none of these explanations might overlap and may be all partly true at one level or another. So his explanation, straightforward, well, sort of straightforward, as he said, that it wasn't that Yaakov openly hated and knew consciously that he hated Leah, but he had some inner subconscious resentment that's going on. This is, way before. Oh, I'm sorry. All right. Thank you. I got a little message from Amy saying that she has to leave. So we'll continue. She can always listen somewhere else. So he says that it was a subconscious. You see, he felt he was deceived. And somewhere in his psyche, in his personality, he felt, he was upset about this. And he didn't know that he was upset. And by the way, Leah didn't even know that she was hated, because openly it was a wonderful marriage. But God saw it, and that's why he emphasizes the second line. It says God saw that Leah was hated. In other words, God is the one who realized that there was a subconscious, and therefore he had Leah have many, many children to be able to heal the situation. So this was God intervening into the situation. Which is also an interesting and very important point, is that, sometimes we don't necessarily understand all the forces that are acting on us and why we act a particular way. There is this great subconscious effort, the thing that's going on always in our mind, and we don't necessarily know that there's things going on inside of there that is affecting how we're behaving. There was, I think, a week or 2 weeks ago, one of the great founders, the guy who's called the founder of cognitive behavioral psychology, Aaron Beck, was 100 years old. He passed away. And his whole thrust was psychology was different than the thrust of Freud and his crowd. which were also a bunch of Jews. all these guys are Jews. It's interesting. They made a joke once that if all the students of Freud got together, they would easily have a minion, except for Carl Jung. But all of them were atheists except for Carl Jung. He was the only believer, but he was a very Christian guy, so he was the only one. In fact, it's interesting that they say Carl Jung. He once gave an interview. And in the interview, they asked him, what was the source of all your ideas about psychology? And he says it comes from a 17th century Jewish rabbi named Dover of Mezrich, which is the Maggid of Mezrich. So he got it basically from the Baal Shem Tov. It's where he got his philosophies from. So he was the only one who really believed. The other ones really didn't. But anyway, so kind of debate, maybe I'm back. Why am I bringing him up? Because it says that, see, now Amy left, so she doesn't get all the psychology stuff. So, anyway, his thing was that emotions don't come from nowhere. Emotions come because you thought about something. If you didn't think about it, you probably wouldn't give rise to the emotion. So if you can correct the thought, you can reframe the situation, as we've talked about many times here, about, with a deeper level of understanding, then the emotion also follows. But what this story is telling, which is something that Beck also agreed, was that that's true for many things that happen in our life, but you can't always necessarily start with a thought. Sometimes there are things in our personality and our soul that pushes on us, and we don't know where that comes from. It comes from somewhere deeper inside of ourselves. And that has a very strong effect on our emotions and our feelings and our responses to things. And so Yaakov he was not really aware of what was going on, but on a certain subconscious level, this was definitely affected him. And there's another great rabbi, much later, Polish rabbi, the Megala Amukos, who lived in Poland in the 1800s, and he wrote a book, and he said, all the rest of Chumash Bereshis that follows on after this, the whole story of Yosef and his brothers in Egypt and everything else, is all based on this particular thing, because all the brothers resented Yosef because, why? Because your mother was the favorite subconsciously, and not our mother, and therefore this was all played out in the next generation, that they felt that they were being rejected also subconsciously by Yaakov, and Yosef was being favored. So, we all think of our families as being wonderful and perfect, but the truth of it is, perfection is not really what we're at. We're about fixing things, and so even in the most perfect of perfect families, Jewish families, there are things to work on, and therefore there were things that needed improvement. And that's part of being human. And it's not being about perfect and being an angel, but nevertheless, and these people were human beings. That was the beauty of it. But there are things to be worked on, and this is part of what happened there. So that's one interpretation. That's the second interpretation. The third interpretation comes from the Ramban, who was a 12th century Sephardi rabbi, very famous. This is Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, not to be confused with the Maimonides. Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, who's called the Rambam. That's a mem at the end and not a nun at the end. And his was fairly straightforward. He says, actually, Yaakov was upset. He said, your father's a surrender, but you shouldn't have gone along with him. But I understand. I understand that you did, because, you're a good Jewish girl and you followed what your father said. But I don't mean that I really like what you did to me. And it was only when, as I said earlier, that Leah started having child after child after child, and they were so wonderful, that he realized, what, I love this lady because she's just fantastic, because look at how the kids are turning out. She's just raising them fantastically. And so Yaakov came to love Leah. But at the first, there was some resentment. So that's how the Ramban explains it. The last explanation, which is the most Hasidic of the lot, which covers a lot of psychology and a lot of about who we are, and why we're calling this class, the class about dealing with those OMG moments, the oh my God moments, how do you deal with it, comes from the Alter Rebbe and his son, the Rabbi Dov Ber, also referred to as the Mittler Rebbe, who explains what his father said. And the Alter Rebbe wrote it up, and he explained it a little bit Kabbalistically, but I'll try and bring it down into a very practical way of understanding ourselves and about the Parsha. So he says that Rachel and Leah are not just two historical characters, but they're also two aspects in every inside each personality, each side soul, and inside each soul, and also within, just in general, within the world and the way the world operates. So he says that the root of the soul of Rachel was from the world of the Alma Iskalia, which is the Aramaic phrase, which means the world of revelation. And Leah came from the world of Alma Diskasia, which is the concealed worlds. What does this mean? What does this mean practically? So, I mean, we see this a little bit in their lives. I mean, where was Leah buried? The same place as Yaakov in Kever Machpelah, which means hidden in a cave. It was a concealed place. And Rachel was buried in Bethlehem, but not in a cave. I mean, it was there's a Kever built around her, but she was buried on the road outside. Rachel represents, make it simple. Rachel is, if you go and you talk to a person and you say, tell me something about yourself. And if they really trust you and you trust them, then you'll learn some very interesting things. They'll tell you all sorts of things about themselves and what they're consciously aware of and what's going on with them and what's happening with them and their feelings and so forth like that. That is what Rachel represents, that part of ourselves, that part of our soul that we're in touch with consciously. But as I said earlier about hidden aspects, hidden personalities, the hidden hate, the hidden stuff like that, there's another part of us and it affects us a lot. In certain days you wake up and you don't know why. And it's coming from a place that you can't really intellectually, it's not coming from a place where you're intellectually aware of or necessarily conscious of. Today, I just feel terrible or rotten. And there's something going on in my soul. It's just a bad hair day or something else is going wrong or something else is not happening and so forth. And you just have this feeling or you're just affected by something and you can't really explain why. You see something and it really bothers you and it keeps you going for hours and hours and hours. And you really couldn't analyze it and understand where it's coming from. Leah represents that part of our personality that we really are not able to control because it goes beyond our conscious reasons. It goes beyond where we can possibly understand. It is from, from complete concealment and so forth. And this marriage here is referring not only to the marriage between husband and wife, but sometimes the marriage even with ourselves. And certainly our relationship with our children and our other families and so forth, that there are two parts that we have. There's the part that we're familiar with and we like, just as Yaakov, when he saw Rachel, he saw her immediately, and he said, I relate to this. This is part of me. I can connect to this. These are the things I identify. And you know what? I really like that and so forth. And so he saw it and he immediately was attracted to that part. But there's also the part of our spouse and the part of our marriage and a part of our family and so forth, the part that, sort of like, goes, I don't understand where that's coming from. It's completely mysterious. In fact, it's so bizarre. I can't love it. I can't love it because I can only love the things that I can really wrap my head around. And that's an important lesson that the Alter Rebbe explains. And he says, we really don't fall in love with the things that we just don't connect to. We think it's weird, think it's Meshuggah, and we don't really relate to that. And so, but that's the truth. I mean, people have two parts to them. The parts that I understand, but there's also a part of the person that I can't get my hand around because they're unique and they're different than me. And therefore, part of accepting and part of being married and part of having a relationship is getting used to that part and getting comfortable relating to that part. But it's not easy to get to that. In fact, that, he says, that's what you see in the story. Yaakov did not fall in love with Leah, right away. In fact, it was a shock to him in the morning. He woke up and he goes, oh my God, what have I done here? Who am I connected to? Who did I really marry? And anybody who's gotten married can probably tell you, that you thought you were marrying one person, right? But Rachel, and you found you're marrying another one, Leah. Because when you get married, you find out all sorts of things about your partner that you really didn't know about before, and you couldn't possibly have known until that part of their personality comes out. So it's a shock to you. And the only way to deal with shocking events, that was the topic, is to have faith and to understand that, you know what, there's lots of stuff that we can't wrap our mind around. And that's why we call the class Faith and Calm. Faith and Calm was about saying, I can be open to something that's bigger than me. Now, most people can't have trouble with this, and we all have trouble with this. Me too. Because in order to be comfortable with those things that we don't understand, whether it's a thing happening to us, a sickness, or some other event that we really aren't comfortable with and not happy with, and so forth, we have to have a lot of humility in saying, you know what, it's not going to go necessarily your way. And you have to be able to readjust yourself and re-examine oneself and redefine oneself. And nobody wants to do that because it takes a lot of work and a lot of self-introspection and a lot of freedom and time to be able to do. And we just want to get along with what we're doing originally. But you know what? God sends sometimes a period of time like COVID. And he says, I'm going to shock all of you people. It's not going to work. Keep going back to normal like you thought. The way that you were conceiving it, the way you were framing it in your mind is not the way it really is. Life is bigger than that and bigger than what you thought. And therefore, he's really given a shock to everybody. And he said, you know what, now can you accept this bigger part that you're not at this thing that you're not normally able to? The world of concealment, the world alma di scasia, the concealed world. And in the end, if you can do that, then you find out that you are that Rachel and Leah merged together. And that also is part of the story, because if you actually do the arithmetic, you will find that Yaakov was not married to Leah very long. And in fact, he's not buried with Leah. She passed away quite young, only about 14 years after they got married. And he has spent the rest of his life with Leah, or at least a lot of the rest of his life with Leah. So he was married to Leah because they both really merged together. Leah and Rachel are really one, in certain spiritual way, one person. And it's the two parts of my spouse, the two parts in any relationship. There's the part of the person that I directly relate to and the part that I don't relate to. And both of these actually come together. And this is part of the Faith and Calm class series, is trying to come to the acceptance of these two different parts in ourselves, and two parts in our children and parts in our relatives and everything else. That there are parts that I see directly that I love, and there are parts that I really can't connect to, and so forth. And if you want to see this, how the beautiful tapestry of Judaism, how this all relates and connects with many other different stories in it, you can look at the story in Purim. My wife's not going to speak tonight because she's still a little bit under the weather. So you're just going to hear from me, and I'm going to wrap it up soon. So the story is as follows. In Purim, it goes as, I'm sorry, yeah, she's online. You can see her there.
Yeah. I wanted to mention that you said that he was only married to Leah for a short time. You meant to say Rachel. He was only married to Rachel and then Leah not so long either, because Rachel passed away first. Yes. And Rachel was in her 40s probably. And Leah was about 51 when she passed away. And the only one we hear about later is Bilhah, who made it all the way down to Egypt with him. And I think she probably even survived him, but I'm not sure.
Thank you. Rebbitzin. She is here. Although she's completely concealed, as you can see. There's only a black there, but she's from Alma Discasia. And you don't even hear her voice really, because for a while I was trying to figure out who is this person who's giving me this advice. But I couldn't figure it out.
Yes, Shimon, can we also dedicate the class to my father, my uncle?
Sure. So this class is dedicated in the memory and the zechus, and who we both personally, we have a tremendous akira satov to Shalom Yeshuda's uncle, who lived in Israel the last years of his life. He was a Holocaust survivor. His name is Yisrael Moshe Ben Mordechai, and he was a doctor. And I think he was not just a doctor, although he was a doctor MD, he was also very much a spiritual doctor, because we knew when we came there how much he took care of my wife and myself, and how he was able to make people really realize that, that medicine is not just about, being, some sort of technical mastery of the body, but also you have to think about the whole person. And that was very much his way of doctoring and healing people.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
What is an interruption? It's called harmony. Right. So back to the point then, because the stories really help nail it home a little bit. This is not quite a story, but it's sort of a story. I mean, if you remember the story with Purim, at one point in time, Esther is arguing with her uncle Mordecai. Oh, here we go. Mordecai. And she's telling him, she's saying that, I can't go into Ahasuerus because if you go into that crazy man, you could end up with a head shorter and so forth. And Mordecai says to Esther three things. He says, Esther, don't think that you'll get out of this, you if you don't go in, and so forth, they'll track you down. The SS and the Gestapo will find you and they'll kill you. That you're not escaping from this either. They'll, eventually, if he's killing all the Jews, they'll find out you're Jewish and they'll get you also. And then he says, and also the second point he makes is that God will take care of the Jews, but if you don't do what you're supposed to do right now, I can't promise what's going to happen with you and your household, what's going to be your future and so forth. So God will take care of the Jews one way or another, but this is your opportunity. But the third thing he says is very unusual, and when you think about it, you'll see how strange it is. He says, "Mio Dea, who knows? Maybe this is exactly why you were selected to be the queen." Mio Dea, who knows? Now, usually when you make an argument, you argue and you make cases that are going from a weaker to a stronger to a stronger to a stronger case. If Mordecai really wanted to make an airtight case, he really should have told Esther, Esther, I'm a prophet. I know what's going to happen. If you go into the king, you're gonna come out the hero of the story. They're going to make a book after you. They're going to call it Megillah's Esther, and you're going to be the heroine of the Jewish people for all time. So go in there. It's a open and shut case. You have nothing to fear. But instead, he tells her, who knows? And that's not really, doesn't sound very strong. That's not really, maybe not, maybe who knows what's going to be, and so forth. So he's not the only person. Several rabbis.
Why did he do that? Why didn't he make it easier on her?
Right. So he was telling her, so this is according to the Hayim Volozhin and the Ispitzer and many other rabbis, they all said the same thing and so forth. They said a very interesting point. They said the following. They said, Esther, it wouldn't have been an answer because in the end, a certain way, Esther is a tragic character. She ends up, everybody is celebrating Purim, everybody's back with their families, and she is stuck with this nutcase, a drunk, who likes to dance naked on tables and so forth and hates the Jews, and she's stuck being married to him, and she can't have a nice Jewish family and raise kids. And she could certainly ask God, saying, why me? Why did this happen to me? Why did a nice girl who was always a straight A student, the best girl in the seminary, always a good Jewish girl, always did the right thing, but followed the rabbis and so forth, why should I be the one who had such a sad life that this is what happened to me? I was cut off from the Jewish people and stuck in this palace, which I don't want to be in, and so forth. So it didn't answer her question. So Mordecai was telling her a very important thing, which connects with this faith and calm, but also this whole world of concealment, of hiddenness. Mordecai was telling her, Mio Dea, there are some things, the biggest thing from God is sometimes we can't wrap our head around. We can't understand it. We can't swallow it. It's not something we actually can internalize. You don't know how things are. Sometimes we really discover who we are by going beyond where our mind goes. Even our religious, our trained mind, and it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit with Torah. It doesn't fit with law. It doesn't fit according to, yes, I know, but that's because God is the author of all of this, and he created a big world, and there are things that are bigger. And sometimes you have to be able to open yourself up and saying, you know what? Yeah, it seems like complete obstacle in my life. This is an obstacle. This is not right. And this is not how things supposed to go. And, and it's like a tragedy. And I don't like this. You're right. And you should cry for those sort of things. On the other hand, you can't necessarily block out God and saying, because it happened, it's not happened because it's not from God, right? Like that guy who wrote the book, why do good things happen to bad people? And the conclusion was, it was, out of God's control, it just happened. And that's not an answer. That's not a terrible answer, because that means it's a cold, indifferent, stochastic, random world, and things can happen and they're just terrible. What it really is in the darkness, there is something here, but I may never be able to, I may understand it, or I may never be able to understand it. I think in history, we understand we're all descendants from Esther and her act. And her act is in what she did, is why all Jewish people are alive today, because if she do what she did, we wouldn't be around. So we are the testimony, and we are the monument to what Esther gave her life for. And that is one of the reasons we celebrate on Purim, Ad Lo Yada, drinking, it's a strange thing, but we're actually celebrating this idea that, there's some things that are just not understandable, why this should keep happening, why this is still happening. Why are we still like this? Why is this still going on? So, this is part of faith and calm, is, don't expect all the answers right away. Don't expect the answers in the class. Sometimes it's bigger than that. And you don't have to necessarily fall apart because of it. Because when you use that power, that fifth power of the soul, which goes beyond our intellect, beyond our attempt to wrap our brain around and make a nice, neat package of everything, make it understandable and make it pleasant, have it, then we don't. It's sort of like with cooking too. They say, in Hebrew, the word for understanding is the same word sometimes as tam. That's the word they use. And tam has two meanings. Tam means I can understand it, but also tam means that I can taste it. So with foods, there are foods that are immediately, you don't have to use any arguments, and kids and people immediately know they like them. I really like, chocolate brownies, and I really like that cheesecake. And I really like, you don't have to tell people Kit Kats taste wonderful, and so forth. They go for them anyway. And then there are things like kale and juicing and other kinds of things, and you have to develop a taste for it and so forth. So there are things in life that you have to develop a taste for, and so forth. And the more sophisticated you are, the more you're able to accept more and more of these things. But not all of them. Some of them you should reject. But sometimes, like I said, the spouse, the partner, the child that you got is really a way to actually challenge yourself to become something bigger and bigger than you thought you were. And people who have had very challenging situations, I've noticed the parents, they just become, kids with Alzheimer's, not Alzheimer's, but with ADHD or severe cases of what do they call it? I forget the term anymore. But anyway, there's stronger things. What?
ADHD, you forget which term.
ADHD, but there's kids who are more, or the ADHD is like in the middle of the road of isolation. There are kids who are just like completely blocked, right?
Autism,
severe autism cases. And the parents, are just, some parents just gushing with love and attention and it brings out a certain level inside of the parents too. So so sometimes, it's a challenge that, you say, why me? And why did I have to deal with this? And why? But, sometimes you really, by redefining yourself and growing, you actually discover much deeper levels inside of yourself. So it doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem fair. And everything should have been good. But it's that's life. Life is about accepting the alma discasia, the Leah part of us, the Leah part in our personality, and the Leah in the events that happen in our life. And you realize that you actually are, by going through it, you actually are becoming a greater person. Maybe not you do it all in a beautiful swimming way, but but the more you are able to open yourself up to that, the more, the better, the more richer a human being you become and able to give to other people. So that is the lesson I think that we get from this story and from this class. And I'll leave it open for questions, but I did want to end early because Or unless my beautiful wife has anything to add to this idea, she can do that too.
She's muted.
She's still muted.
Yeah, she's
In
still
more
muted.
than ways than one, she wants to save her voice and so that she can speak.
No, I just want to say not to miss next week, because next week is Yotes Kislev, and Emir Hashem, I'm going to be hale and hearty by then, Emir Hashem, and we're going to do a special class. So, and I think you'll enjoy it.
Lovely. I hope you feel better.
Amen. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I look forward to that.